And I appreciate everyone coming today. I'm Congressman Johnson. I represent Georgia's 4th Congressional District. Anybody from Georgia? All right, good, wonderful, good to see you all. This is a historic annual legislative conference of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Over 4,000 people pre-registered for this event. And registration is also open daily, so people can register for that day and attend all of the events. So I think this will probably end up being a record-breaking event for the annual legislative conference of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, which is in place to raise revenue for scholarships and fellowships and internships for our young people coming through. That's what this is all about, fundraising, so that we can support our young people coming through, and you all are making it happen. So give yourselves a hand. And you wouldn't be here if the stakes were not as high as they are. People, the reason why those registration figures are up is people know that there's a movement going on in this country that is hostile and unsafe for us, and that we are in jeopardy of losing some of the liberties and some of the freedoms that we have come to take for granted that we did not always have in this country. And it's been the United States Supreme Court that has taken away or affirmed the fact that we don't have any rights. Exhibit A, Plessy versus Ferguson of 1896, where segregation was ruled the law of the land, and it took 60 years to get that overturned with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. That was the Supreme Court coming to establish equality for Black people in this country. Integration is inherently unequal, is what the court ruled in Brown versus Board. And but since then, since 1954, when the schools were to desegregate with all deliberate speed, we've seen how schools remain largely segregated, public schools in this country. And but it's been the courts that have made equality somewhat attainable for us. But now we've seen a movement over the last 40 years to ensure that the court will not be the type of court like the Warren Court that gave us our rights in 1954. They want a court that will take away our rights, and they have carefully constructed it. And that is what they have today, with a 6-3 majority on this court. And for the first time in its history, the court actually took away a right. It was a right of women to have reproductive freedom over their bodies. And in conjunction with that movement, they also found that affirmative action is unconstitutional in regard to school admissions in both public and private institutions of higher learning. That creates a barrier to access for higher education for us. And so Make America Great Again doesn't just resonate on the streets, it resonates in the suites and also in the chambers of Supreme Court justices who are leading the effort to take away our rights. And so this panel today is all about reforms on the United States Supreme Court, of which I've introduced 3 important measures. One is to unpack the court by adding seats to it. That's a short-term solution. The second solution is more long-term and actually more fundamental, and that is to negate this idea that's not stated in the Constitution, by the way, that justices have lifetime appointments. It just says that they should serve during times of good behavior, during a period of good behavior. And doesn't say lifetime tenure, but that's what we've taken it to. We've assumed that it has meant, and that is what it has meant in practice, lifetime tenure. So justices expect that they will be on the bench for lifetime. And Clarence Thomas has been on the bench for about 31 years. It feels like a lifetime. And he's committed to doing another 15 years, I think, to accomplish his objectives, which are to reverse everything that enabled him to even be in that position in the first place. So he's committed to that. So term limits for Supreme Court justices is the other piece of legislation that would dispel the kind of condition that we have on the court now, where it has been captured by corporate interests. Dark money, corporate, secret money interests has been captured. And the third piece of legislation would be to require the court to adhere to a code of conduct so that we could eliminate the unethical and illegal activities that are taking place on the court. Clarence Thomas being Exhibit A. Another ProPublica article released today shows how he was connected to the Coke network. And it also shows how that Coke dark money network was actually, when you include the money from the Federalist Society that they raise, all of these dark money groups raising the money, putting it into a single pot under the control of the Koch brothers, basically, their organization, and then that organization doling out the money to various groups in that network, including the Tea Party that was formed to get rid of Barack Obama. So they fund all kinds of different operations, from the streets to the suites, campaign contributions, a Federalist Society network to get judges from law schools onto the bench so that they can rule in favor of the corporate interests that put them there. And so it's an ugly situation that our democracy finds itself in right now. We can't have democracy only for white males. If black folks in this country and people of color and others, women, LGBTQ, if we don't have freedom and democracy, then this is not a democracy. So this is a fight to save democracy for all. And we're the ones who are the first, our asses are the first that are on the table to be consumed. And so we have to act, and we have to act now. And I'm proud to lead this panel. I appreciate Roland Martin for agreeing to moderate, and Roland, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, glad to have folks here. Our panel of folks joining us right now is Angela Vasquez-Garot, Vice President of Communications Research and ARAL, Pro-Choice America. Also have Ellie Mistel, you see the hair, Justice Correspondent with The Nation. We'd like to have him here. Rashad Robinson, you see him with his hat. He wasn't there last night, Rashad. I broke it back out. Rashad Robinson, he's President of Color of Change. And the bio says the Honorable Bakari Sellers, the dishonorable Bakari Sellers. All your equipment, see what your chick, boy, stop. Please. Attorney, former state legislator in South Carolina, and also television pundit. Let's get right to it. L.A., we'll start with you. Congressman talked about the ProPublica story today. What we have today, probably, we could say we've had it in the past before, but this is truly a purchased Supreme Court.
Clarence Thomas.
See, he was just ready to blast.
Clarence Thomas is the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in the history of the country that we know of.
Okay, start that over again.
Clarence Thomas is the most corrupt Supreme Court justice in the history of the country that we know of. I don't personally know whether or not First Chief Justice John Marshall was paid for by which George Washington Slaver Inc. Corporation. I don't know that information. But for the information that I have, Clarence Thomas is the worst in history. All right? So what do we do about that?
Well, hold on. I don't want you to go back because we have to expand that. It's Thomas, but it's Alito, it's Federalist Society, it's Gorsuch, it's Kavanaugh. So it goes beyond Clarence Thomas.
All of them are on the take in some way, right? Neil Gorsuch had a piece of real estate that magically got sold 2 weeks after he ascended to the Supreme Court that was on the market for 3 years prior, right? Sam Alito will take fishing trips with Big Pharma. Brett Kavanaugh, I mean, just pick one, who paid off his debts. He had massive debts before he started the confirmation process.
And now they're just gone.
That suddenly went away. Really, the only uncorruptible justice that I'm sure of is Elena Kagan, who will put down whether or not she got free locks on her bagel, and I am not making that up. But the rest of them are, especially the Republican ones, are on the take in some way. The issue is that the people, you have to understand, the people who are buying them are getting something for their money. Right?
Oh yeah, you don't, hey, you don't fly, as they say, somebody got flew out. You don't fly somebody on your private jet or on your yacht and you ain't trying to get something.
So one of the things that I've been telling people is like, all right, so we all know about these old ProPublica stories about things that Thomas has been doing in the past. What do you think Clarence Thomas was doing this summer? What do you think the people who bought and paid for him, what do you think they were talking about to him, with him this summer?
And Jenny.
I will tell you what they were talking about. The upcoming this term, there is a Supreme Court case that goes after the 16th Amendment. The 16th Amendment is why we have federal income tax, a bunch of other things. Specifically, the case is basically designed for a wealth tax unconstitutional. The wealth tax isn't in the case, but that's what the case is really about. And that's what these people have been telling Thomas all summer. Hey, you have to rule against the 16th Amendment in this issue, not because of what the legal issue is in front of you, but because next term, next time when the Democrats get control, they're going to pass a wealth tax, and this is how we kill that baby in the crib. That's what they were doing this summer.
No, Elliot, when they get together, they're reading poetry. they're not actually doing those things. Angela, here's the thing that it sort of drives me crazy. Is a lot of people in this country who literally have no clue about history. They don't read. They have no understanding. And so when you have folks say, there's no way you can expand the court. We've done it before. It didn't start off at 9.
Yeah, I think we can do anything we want, right? If there's one thing we've learned from the Trump years, it's that the rules don't apply anymore, right? And we need to take the most aggressive, most bold action. This is,
But there literally are no rules, though. You can actually expand the court because it's been done.
Yes, and we should, right? I mean, you look at the court now, it's clearly problematic, and we can't trust the court. The American people know this. A poll just came out last week and this week, and there will probably be one next week, that American confidence in the Supreme Court is plummeting. There's never been a time, probably in our lives, where that's been true, but leading up to Dobbs, the leak, the decision, and everything since then, it's supposed to be this sacred institution that upholds our rights, and instead they are not only systematically taking our rights away, but they're gunning for more. There's no reason, again, not to do this. It's whether or not we can marshal up the support and mobilize the folks who understand this needs to happen and get it done. But this is, the court reform issue, I think, is the most pressing issue and the most capable of helping us solve some of the underlying problems that we're all facing in our various issue areas.
Okay, just really quickly, just partially answer that question. When Rowan says it's been done before, he ain't lying. At the founding, there were 6 justices. I'll take you through the whole story. There were 6 justices. John Adams put it down to 5. Thomas Jefferson put it back up to 7. Andrew Jackson put it up to 9 because he hated the federal bank and he needed more justices to hate the federal bank. Abraham Lincoln put it up to 10 because he was sick of racist ass Roger Taney, so he put it up to 10. All right. Then Andrew Johnson comes on. Congress hates Andrew Johnson, so they're trying to take justice.
So do black people.
And so they bring it down to 7 for Andrew Johnson. And then after Johnson is out, we have the 1869 Judiciary Act, and that's where we've been at 9 since then. FDR promised to take it to 17, and people say, oh, FDR lost, but did he?
That's what the court packing.
Yeah, his court packing plan didn't lose, because while FDR didn't expand the court, what happened was that FDR was losing all of his New Deal cases 5-4. And then a justice named Owen Roberts, no relation to the current Chief Justice John Roberts, switched, after FDR started threatening court packing, Owen Roberts changed his vote on all of the New Deal cases, and so FDR started winning 5-4. So if you're going to call FDR a failure, I would love to fail the way FDR failed at court packing.
Rashad, Angela mentioned that she used the word sacred, and I think for so long, folks have operated about the Supreme Court. They're the Supremes. That ain't Mary Wilson and Diane Ross. They're the Supremes. And they've operated literally no rules, no governance. We are so above everyone else that we self-govern. We are now seeing that is literally the stupidest thing in the world.
Well, you know, I think one of the big challenges we have about the courts is we've told a false story about the courts. That they've always been this sort of place where we could go to get our rights protected or to advance rights. And outside of some brief periods in time during the sort of Warren era, the courts have consistently, over time, put their hands on the scale of big corporations, have put their hands on the scale of the most money interests, have put their hands on the scale against Black people and people of color. And they've done it time and time again. This is why activism and engagement is so important. I'm so happy you brought up the point about FDR, because that is why I think the campaign and advocacy work we have to do in this moment to challenge this court, to challenge these ideas of sacred structures which have stood in the way of our sacred rights. We have to do the work to challenge that, because while we may not necessarily win on getting a whole new set of numbers of folks on the courts, being able to communicate and engage and build the type of power among everyday people to fight back against what we are facing is going to be necessary, because people have a false story of the courts. I remember the last time I think I saw Congressman Johnson, we were in a holding cell on the Capitol after being arrested for around voting rights.
Was that in Magic City that one time?
Definitely not Magic City.
Oh, I was like, I was there.
No.
You escaped through the back door for the back game.
No fighting over wings or anything else, I promise.
Right, lemon pepper wings, right.
What I will say about that is that we show up and we face down the Senate. We show up and we face down Congress. We show up and we face down our president. We hold these institutions accountable. But there is nothing sacred about these institutions that do not have accountability, that do not have rules, that do not have ethics standards, and that consistently can make choices about our rights every single day. And so what we actually need is a new level of activism and engagement that both continues to expose what's happening at the court, but puts forward a new set of demands, puts forward a new set of asks of our elected officials to hold this institution accountable. Because we can't keep doing all the work to turn out voters every single election cycle, and then after we do all the work, have unelected, unaccountable, a set of people being able to determine what happens or what doesn't happen with the will of the people.
Bakari, I love the show Scandal, and I love the character Papa Pope. And there was this scene where he says to Olivia Pope, you need to get you some power, some 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue power. Well, folks did that. Elected President Joe Biden, one of the first things he did was, let's do a blue ribbon study, which we all know is DOA in Washington, D.C. And the thing that I think probably drives a lot of Democrats crazy, Republicans flex power, they use power. Democrats don't. How, or is it even possible, to move Democratic senators and a Democratic president to get them to expand the court? No white wicker chairs here, so.
I think we have to back up just a tad, because if we look over my recent history, I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina. I say that often. We have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. My mom and dad always tell me the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you. And so first, I just want to say thank you to Congressman, because I don't come to CBC, but I come because you asked, and I appreciate your ask. And this issue is that important. But just recent history, I think that this country pulled one of the cruelest tricks on Black folk in American history when they when they nominated and voted for and appointed Clarence Thomas to replace Thurgood Marshall. But let's actually think about, I just turned 39 on Monday, but I would argue that the three most consequential events of the Supreme Court literally happened during my lifetime. Or I would argue the appointment of Clarence Thomas. I would argue something that happened when you say Republicans flex power. They flex power and hold their own accountable, because I would argue that the removal of Harriet Miers and replacing Justice Alito, or replacing Harriet Miers with Justice Alito, was just as consequential. And they flex power, again, to your point, by the grandstanding and the filibustering of Merrick Garland going to the Supreme Court. Those three events are so consequential. But I don't blame Republicans for the mess that we're in today with the court. I don't at all. In fact, I think there's one man to blame. His name is Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel's disdain. Rahm Emanuel, first of all, he's a rude dude. But Rahm Emanuel's disdain for justices, his misunderstanding of the import of the court when he was chief of staff for the President of the United States, set us back so much.
When he was the chief of staff for President Barack Obama.
Correct. I mean, Rahm Emanuel was quoted as saying, we don't have fucking time to deal with the courts. So it's hard to make the issue sexy.
I don't give a fuck about judges. Like,
direct quote. So imagine if Barack Obama came outside one day and said, black folk, Democrats, I love the judiciary. Then you know what we're gonna say in OA? Well, I love them too. Give me your list of judges or justices we wanna put up. Every election, don't you find it ironic that every election a Republican must give you their potential nominees? You didn't see Elizabeth Warren's potential nominees, you didn't see Joe Biden's potential nominees, you didn't see Kamala's potential nominees. Democrats just didn't find it sexy.
Well, yeah, I totally agree with you when it comes to Rahm Emanuel, but who picked Rahm Emanuel? The constitutional law professor who picked Rahm Emanuel. So I can blame Emanuel.
I'm not gonna come to CBC and blame Barack.
Well, I will. Let me be real clear.
Congressman Johnson, let it be clear. Let it be clear who's doing this.
No, hold on. That ain't a problem, because I had no problem critiquing him to his face over 8 years. I cannot blame the chief of staff if I'm going to ignore the person who picked the chief of staff.
Fair enough.
And I cannot blame the chief of staff if the person who picked the chief of staff is a constitutional lawyer who should have understood the value of the Supreme Court. So to your point, Democrats got comfortable with the Supreme Court and said, oh, Roe v. Wade, all good, when the right was saying, we are getting rid of all of this. But the right is telling you, we're getting rid of it. So
you're not wrong. Let me just finish this, because I don't want nobody on Instagram talking. I don't want my name behind your name.
Actually, you should, because my name is bigger, but go right ahead. You know you walked into that with those cute socks, but go ahead.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
You got it. No, you got to respect. So this is what I'm going to do.
Respect that wisdom, but I do want to know, what do you tell Democrats today? Because you already said what Democrats have.
Well, I mean, first of all, we kind of, and Ellie can talk to this, I think we about shit out of luck about 30 years. I think we kind of made that bed.
I don't think so.
Well, listen, these white folk they put on the court, listen, the most unhealthy person on the court is John Roberts. Mm-hmm. And he's the 62. So he got another 23 years in DC. You got Amy Coney Barrett, who's a baby. Brett Kavanaugh, who's a baby.
The best two choices are legal Congress and both of us have.
That's what I'm telling you. And so I'm not saying this ship is sailed. We got to fight, but we made a mistake.
Oh, absolutely.
Democrats made a generational mistake.
Especially 2016.
Well, I'm going back to 08, but where we were originally. Democrats made a generational mistake by not treating the court as a sexy island. And Republicans always, it's a litmus test for Republicans. For us, it's a thing. For them, they have to show conservative credentials of who their nominees will be, and that's why you have the Federalist Society and everything else. So but by the way, I'm just happy to be here. I filled the bar twice before I passed it. So y'all got me up here talking about the Supreme.
So Ellie, the reason this also drives me crazy because literally, the right has been saying publicly, loudly, and everywhere, and if you really take it back, since Brown v. Board of Education, 1 and 2, since the Fifth Circuit and what they did when it came to enforcing that, then the various laws coming after that, then Roe v. Wade, they made it clear. This is what our agenda is. So it's not like when all those women were outside the Supreme Court at the Dobbs decision, they were protesting, I was like, they told you what they were going to do. And then I then said to those same largely white women, where were y'all when those black folks were fighting for the John Lewis Act and those voting acts? They were absent. It was Congressman Johnson, Congresswoman Beatty. I don't recall a single white female congresswoman who got arrested. Did Lizzie Warren get arrested? No. I don't recall a single one. And so I'm going, we were yelling this, and they were yelling it, and we were going, yo, they crazy. And then the response was after the fact, oh dang, now we should do something.
I can answer both questions at the same time, both that question and the what do you tell Democrats? Because what I tell Democrats whenever they don't take my call often, but when they do, is I can help you win elections. Because the people understand that the court is important. And for proof of that, look at what happened in Kansas. Look at what happened in Ohio. Look at what happened in these states. Whenever the Republicans put their horrible Supreme Court agenda on the ballot, Republicans lose in Republican states. Look at what happened in Wisconsin. Joe Biden should be running on the coattails of Janet Pisakowskiewicz, whose name I can't fully pronounce, but he should be riding on her coattails because she won her race by 10 points, whereas Joe Biden won his race in Wisconsin by half a point. All right, so the voters care about this. The other way that I can prove it is look at what Republicans do, and this is to Roland's point. Republicans for a generation have been telling their voters that the Supreme Court is the most keep them in line with the Republican Party.
I literally just said that.
So I can,
He's reiterating.
So I can go to a diner and talk to some person in a trucker hat and they don't know nothing about nothing, but they know they gotta vote for the Supreme Court because they got gays kissing on people. And so they're gonna vote Republican because of the Supreme Court. We have voters who could be like that. We have single issue voters on the Supreme Court. I can help you win elections if you center the Supreme Court and tell people the attack on their rights that are coming and how you, Senator, you, Congressman, you, President, are going to fix it.
Well, this is why this has to be part of a long-term organizing strategy. We try to win long-term fights with short-term energy and short-term strategies. This was a 30-year effort on the right. And so the question here is what is our appetite to put forward a 30-year fight on our side? What is the effort to put the infrastructure, the resources, the time, and the engagement, and recognizing that there will be losses along the way, but if we have a North Star, then we're consistently sort of moving towards that North Star. The power of litmus tests is that they get us away from the sort of personality of whether or not we like a candidate or not, but get us into whether or not that candidate is actually going to deliver. And when we can create the type of litmus test, where the money from? What type of person will you put on the court? What type of issues have you voted for or not voted for in the past? Who are your corporate backers and who are the corporations you have taken on? Then we actually get to the real conversations. But I do think sort of gotten ourselves into is this battle. And I see Professor Crenshaw out here, and I can't help but acknowledge Kim Crenshaw's working, yes, to fight back against that Clarence Thomas nomination when there were so many folks that thought we just needed to protect the black man and get him on the court, right? People who were on the left who actually did not stand up the way we needed them to stand up against Clarence Thomas, and now we've got 30 years of Clarence Thomas. And so when I talk about litmus test, I'm not talking about just the litmus test of whether or not that person looks like us. I'm talking about the litmus test of what that person will actually do. And when there is a tie, the tie goes to the black person. But when I'm saying when there isn't a tie, we need to recognize that we have to get people on the court that actually will do the things necessary to stand up against the power and against the forces that stand in the way of injustice. And the thing I will say about what's happening right now with the courts, and let's just say this across so many of these issues, and let's just take affirmative action right now. The strategy is not just about what happens in the court, it is about the long legs of the decision, right? And so affirmative action gets dismantled, and now you have Republican attorney generals going after corporations, going after schools, going after other institutions.
Always the strategy.
For all the things. And so what they've effectively done, right, is that they make the solutions the problems, right? We end up with solutions that are not always the best solutions to inequality, but they're the solutions we can get, right? The Voting Rights Act was a compromise. Affirmative action and DEI are compromises. They are the best things that we can get in that era. But privilege, unearned access, unearned opportunity, those are the problems. And then we end up having to argue about whether or not our solutions are the solutions that we want to defend, while they can then protect privilege, unearned access, unearned opportunity, while closing the door to the voting booth, while closing the door to college admission, while closing the door to employment, while closing the door to every other opportunity. And so this is going to have to be a political and a narrative fight. It's going to have to be about making sure that we have people lined up at the front door, because we will always lose in the back rooms without people lined up at the front door. And if we do not make this an issue that people care about and are willing to fight for and willing to go after enablers, whether they be corporations, whether they be media, whether they be other folks that are telling a false story, time and time again, because it is very easy for the right wing to put people on this court if no one is paying attention, and if no one is willing to fight back, and no one is willing to hold elected officials and corporations accountable who are putting us in harm's way, saying they care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, while supporting candidates who put people on the courts that will demand it. Don't come for my money by day and take away my vote by night.
Angela, I understand the focus on Clarence Thomas, who I despise. But I dare say, if 77,000 votes go a different direction in 2016, it's a 6-3 progressive court. And so, if we're talking...
Can I just, one footnote to that? Because your question, I know you're going to Angela, and I believe in holding people accountable. 77,000 votes, correct. But also, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have gone home.
I wasn't done.
Continue.
I wasn't done. You look at 2016, and you look at the conversation that people were having, to Rashad's point, folk were caught up in, I don't like Hillary, I don't know what she's saying. Republicans knew Trump was lying, they knew he wasn't a Republican, but they understood power. And when he said, I'm just going to give y'all judges, they were white evangelicals were like, we know you've been married 3 times, we know you're a hoe, we don't care. Straight up, they voted that way. Then, again, understanding long-term power. Kennedy says, appoint my boy, I'll retire. He retires. Ginsburg, her whole deal was, I want to get replaced by a woman president. Oh, everybody assumed he was going to win. They played the long game. The reason I'm saying this, when McCarthy said it's lost, this is what I've been articulating on my show. Biden-Harris appointed more than 100 judges. They win re-election. You look at next year, they win re-election, you're probably going to see another 200 federal judges. Now it goes up to 300. Democrats focus on winning in 2028, let's say another 200 judges. there are less than 900 federal judges. Democrats win the next 2 presidential elections and hold the Senate, they will have appointed half of all federal judges in the country. That's the type of long-term thinking that they should be operating in when it comes to winning long-term in this country.
Oh, absolutely. You know, the day after Dobbs, which really sucked, FYI, that next day, we all knew that we were in for a 50-year fight. It took us 50 years to lose the right that, you know, Roe was never enough to begin with. And it's going to take 50 years to get us back to where we should have been in 73 for real. So the idea that there's a short-term solution to this, there's not. But there are short-term things that we can do to set ourselves up for success, or to start winning now, or to improve access, or to guarantee rights. Just because we can't win it all tomorrow doesn't mean we shouldn't start winning some things now, right? I think the other piece, you know, we keep talking about power, which is so important, because we, on the abortion rights movement specifically that I've been a part of, you know, we're always in a defensive crouch.
Yep.
But we are the majority. We have been 8 in 10. 8 in 10 Americans believe in the right to legal abortion. This is not new, right? They're pissed now and they're engaged now, and now it's on the ballot and we can vote that way. But we're approaching this fight, and we're still approaching everything that we do with, like, we're gonna make them mad. Like, if we try to pass a bill, they're gonna come for some, like, they're gonna do it anyway.
Right.
They're coming. They're telling us exactly what they're gonna do, and we're sitting there like, can anyone interpret maybe what they might be saying? You know, we need to be clear. We need to be simple.
Yes, what are they saying? Total ban.
Yes,
That's
total
what they're
ban,
saying.
right? This is exactly it. All abortion bans are abortion bans. There is no such thing as a partial ban. There is no such thing as a compromise ban. Every abortion ban hurts women, pregnant people, families. Every single one of them, right? But we want to talk about maybe 15 weeks, maybe it's exceptions, maybe, no, it's a ban. It's a ban, it's a ban, it's a ban.
Ellie, narrative. Those of us who, television, whether we radio or you write, we understand how you have to craft a narrative. And one of the things that I've had to do a lot is collecting the dots. Because the average person, when you say the courts matter, they're like, dude, really? And so every time there is a federal judge rules on a decision that I believe is the best interest of Black people, every time I go, this is why judges matter. So when the federal judge in Louisiana said, get those kids out of Angola, and you got a week, I go on the air and say, this is what a federal judge does. President appoint them, Supreme Court, the Senate confirms or denies. That's why that judge matters. I think part of the problem, if you look at how the right was successful, they tied issues to the judges. When I often hear Democrats talk about judges, it's sort of just this broad thing that democracy is important and judges matter. So if you're, again, for the people sitting here, leaving here, what language should they be using to drive this point on?
Well, you have to start off with thinking about the courts, and as Roland does, covering the courts as if they are a political institution, which they are. Most mainstream media covers the courts like they would cover NASA, right? John Roberts sent a rocket up into space today and found out that women don't have rights. Oh my God, right? No, we have to cover. If Dick Durbin walks in here right now,
Bust his ass.
everybody would recognize him, right? If Sam Alito walked in here right now, most people wouldn't recognize him, and that's because we don't cover these people like in their faces the way we cover all the political organizations. Speaking of Dick Durbin, though, the earmuffs, Roland's forward-thinking history only works if Democrats stay on the ball.
Use their power.
Right?
Or use their power.
Right? And so this is why even things like the appointment to who gets to run the Senate Judiciary Committee become extremely important, because let me tell you about something called the blue slip process.
Talk about it.
Right? So the blue slip process is how a single senator can stop the appointment of a federal judge by simply not returning a blue slip
or
approving,
or a U.S. attorney,
or a U.S. attorney, or a military official, or as we see Tommy Tuberville doing all the time right now, they can stop a federal appointment if it's in their district. So the reason why you don't have liberal judges in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Texas, Louisiana, and some other state, though, Mississippi, I think.
Yeah, Mississippi.
The reason why you don't have a lot of liberal justices there is not because Democrats haven't been appointing judges. It's because Ted Cruz and John Cornyn get to decide which judges get to be on the Fifth Circuit. Dick Durbin could end that process today.
And by the way,
And the right reason I know that is because Lindsey Graham ended that process today when he was in charge of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
and Senator Mitch McConnell, when the Republican senator in Wisconsin and the Democratic senator in Wisconsin did not want a particular judge, Mitch McConnell said, go to hell, and still appointed that judge. So he blew off one of his own Republicans because he knew that judge was involved.
Right now, Ron Johnson, senator from Wisconsin, is single-handedly holding up a federal justice appointment because the man is gay. He doesn't like it. And so he doesn't have his job yet. So like, when we talk about kind of the long-term strategy that Rashad was talking about, this requires us, this requires activists, this requires people who are paying attention to stay with their foot on the gas, up the whatever, of all of our elected officials all the time about this critical issue.
And we should be asking our representatives, our senators, where they stand on pink slips, because you'd be surprised. Blue slips. They'd be surprised about who's actually with us on blue slips and who's not with us on blue slips, and you'd be surprised about sort of the reasonings why, and it doesn't actually then play itself out in the larger numbers of who has been hurt. This is what they talk about in the Senate as gentlemen agreements. And gentlemen agreements have never been good for Black folks. They have never been good for women. They have never been good for anyone who has not been considered a gentleman in the beginning of this country. And so we have a whole set of these rules that sort of involve the courts and appointments and how these processes work. But if anyone watched how they treated Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson through her confirmation, you recognize that folks will decide when they want to be gentlemen and when they actually don't want to be gentlemen. And we can't play into a game that actually continues to put us at the losing end of these conversations.
So the reason I said when Ellie said that Dick Durbin come in, I said bust his ass. The Congressional Black Caucus has been publicly and loudly pressing Senator Durbin to end this practice because it's not just federal judges. There literally are Black and other folks who are waiting to be confirmed to be U.S. attorneys. Biden has been in 3 years. There are some areas they have not confirmed a U.S. attorney because of the blue slip. And so you should be calling Dick Durbin's office. He should be hearing from every single one of us. Now, I love it how they say, well, I'm the senator from Illinois. You don't have to be from Illinois to call him, but because he chairs that committee, that speaks to every single person in this country. So when the Black Caucus talks about when they're jamming up Durbin, those are generals giving you marching orders, but too often troops are not following through. And so we've been putting Durbin's photo on my show. We've been putting up the phone numbers to call. All of that's important because the biggest mistake that I believe I'm not going to say Democratic voters, but folks who vote Democratic. The biggest mistake that I believe folks who vote Democratic make is we go, I don't want to say nothing because it's going to rock the boat. The right has no problem letting their people know where they stand. Durbin should be hearing from every Black person in America and say, stand with the CBC and move on these nominees. Because when you voted for Warnock and Ossoff for them to have, without Black people winning Georgia, he ain't committee chair. So frankly, you can say, bro, you owe us this one here. And to that point right there, Bakari, again, speak to somebody, look, you're in South Carolina, from South Carolina, but speak to why we as voters have to be fully engaged after the election on these issues that too often, frankly, a lot of Democrats get past is because they're not actually hearing from people after the fact until this election.
You know, I got in trouble, I stay in trouble, but I got in trouble with a lot of my friends. I did a podcast with our sister, April Ryan, and she asked me a question about my good friend, Kamala Harris. And my response to April Ryan was that the vice president's portfolio is trash. And she said, elaborate. I said, well, they gave her voting rights, which they know they don't have the votes for. Then they gave her immigration, which they know ain't gonna never pass. And the president is not going to be full-throated behind either one of them. So her portfolio is trash. Now, I didn't know that it was gonna have the ramifications that it did. And April actually asked a question in the White House briefing room that then Jen Psaki, when she had the response to. She said, well, Bakari Sellers says that the vice president's portfolio is trash.
That's unquote, unquote.
Quote unquote. And then the White House had to respond to it. I tell you that because a lot of these conversations are hella uncomfortable. A lot of times you have to ask your friends and speak up for your other friends when they necessarily don't want you out there. Like, for example, let me just give you one example I'm just thinking about off the top of my head. Shout out to Angela Rod's mom and daddy who just came in. I stand on the shoulders of Eddie Rod. How you doing, brother? So imagine if the president of the United States just decided to call a press conference outside with Hank Johnson on his bill about court packing. Now, I'm not saying he got to act like it's going to pass. But what if he just stood beside him to start the conversation? Or better yet, the question should be, why is he not standing beside him to start the conversation? And that's the conversations we have to be willing to have with people who represent us. I can't go out and hold Republicans accountable if I'm not willing to hold our own accountable. I was just whispering to Rashad, we know the reason that our legislative districts are terrible is because of the Congressional Black Caucus and some others. We ain't gonna never talk about that, are we? I mean, are we gonna have that conversation about Congressional Black Caucus members and their Republican counterparts drawing piss poor lines that are a disservice to black folk and brown folk and poor folk in this country? So we gotta actually be willing to have these conversations. And I just implore all of you all to remember that we have to, look, we can talk about Clarence Thomas till we blue in the face. We can, we know who he is. I mean, I really thought that his lack of self-awareness, it belongs in the Hall of Fame. I was reading his order and he went down every iteration and slippery slope he could find of cases that should be overturned using his logical reasoning except for one. Except for Loving. I was reading it, I was like, well, Loving is the next logical case in my God.
That's gonna mess with Miss Jenny.
And so we know who Clarence Thomas is, but let's actually spend some time this week and then leave with some action items that we want the people we love and adore. Congressman Johnson knows that I love him. And part of the reason I love him is because he holds himself accountable. It ain't too much I need to tell him about himself. He's very self-aware and he goes out and does the work. But everybody's not like Hank Johnson, right? And I just think we have to be like Rahm Emanuel, Barack Obama, these individuals. I've actually asked the President of the United States about a couple of things. And one of the things I asked him was about the lack of import on the court. Like, we have to be willing, the first president, do you remember who Al Gore was talking about appointing to the Supreme Court? No, you do not. The first president who actually had this, or nominee who had this conversation, was Hillary Clinton. And we gave her hell because she literally carries hot sauce in her pocket.
Which she did before the election.
No, she literally does.
Years.
For years. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life. So I just think that we have to do a better job refocusing, be goal-oriented, and when we leave this convention, I don't really care for this convention too much. Like I said, it's my first time coming in 10 years because Hank asked me to be here. And the reason I don't care for it is because we really are important to ourselves. And we have a lot of conversations, and we the most meetingest folk that I've ever met in my life. But I want to know what you're going to do next Monday. That's right. That's literally what I want to know. And so I would encourage you to do something simple. Like in your local newspaper, your weekly, Like, write a little op-ed piece about this panel and the court, or better yet, call Hank Johnson's office and understand his bill and write a little op-ed piece about
Mention the legislation.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, this is what I'm at. Look, I'm gonna drink with y'all. I'm going to the South Party. I'm going to the Rick Ross Monica Party. I'm gonna be lit tonight. I'm doing all of those things. But I want you to know that on Monday, I need y'all to do the work. That's what I need you to do.
We'll take a few questions. So we're gonna do this here. We're gonna have one on this side of the room. I'm gonna bounce to this side of the room and go back. We're not lining up. So what's gonna happen is, so here's the rule. Hold up, bro. No, you ain't handing nobody the mic. You holding the mic. Put your hands down, assume the position. We'll need you to hold it. He got it. That's how we gonna do this. And if you don't follow the instructions, I'm gonna come off this damn stage and do it myself. All right, so who has the first person? Okay, the sister in the white, stand up. Stand up, step out the aisle. There you go.
Questions have question marks.
There you go. I got this one, Carter. What's your question, sister? First of all, your name, where you from?
My name is Diana, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan.
Question.
And my question is, we're talking about electoral college, we're talking about the Supreme Court, and the question is, do we need them at all?
Well, first of all, we talk about our system electoral college. I had a brother who said, man, I ain't voting until they give electoral college. I said, bro. Straight up. And he was like dead serious. I said, bro, the folk who are in office can only pass a bill to get rid of the electoral college. And then it has to be signed by the president. Then I said, you know, it's also in the Constitution, so it has to go to the other states. I said, so you not voting on the state level and the federal level, that will never happen. Your dumb ass not voting. Right. He literally had to. So again, so I think, so on that point, one of the things that we have to do, the folk in this room, we have to stop assuming people know and literally explain to them, this is like Schoolhouse Rock 2.0, 3.0, because a lot of people literally have no clue about civics. They just don't.
What if I told you I'm not in favor of getting rid of electoral college or relic from slavery? I know what it is. I know how it was built. I want to hear Ellie and Rashad disabuse me of this notion. But I'm from Denmark, South Carolina. I don't know if I told y'all that. 9 miles away from Denmark is a small town called Norway. And in between Denmark and Norway are 2 small unincorporated towns called Finland and Sweden. I don't want individuals running for president of the United States to only have to campaign in Houston, New York, LA, Philadelphia.
Well, right now they don't. Well, right now they don't actually have to campaign in New York City. They only have to show up to New York City to meet with the richest and wealthiest people and have them determine what their platforms are going to be.
Where you live, Rashad? Where you live?
I live in New York.
Hold up.
But they actually don't, because of the electoral college, they don't have to come to New York.
Rashad. It's all good. I'm from Houston. They both don't show up to Houston because
Nobody wants to go to Houston now. What I'm saying is, if you
Ellie, get them.
If you get rid of the electoral college for folk who don't live in these major urban centers, they not gonna ever see you, and you will never be able to hold them.
Okay, first of all, that is fundamentally flawed and it's
How?
First, again, the reason it is incorrect because when you look at the map right now, and anybody, if you're doing any analysis on TV or radio, every election, they literally break down the election to no more than 8 states. They know right now, any political analyst will tell you, they can look at the map. Angela, I want you to speak to this as well, because y'all do all this mapping as well. They say, we know exactly how North Dakota's gonna vote, South Dakota's gonna vote, Wyoming, Idaho. We already know South Carolina going red. Okay, North Carolina, purple, we're gonna spend some money there. They like Tennessee, we ain't never win in Tennessee. Georgia only in play because of what they did there. They gonna say Arkansas red, Texas red. They gonna break it all down.
They only show up to South Carolina in the primary.
How does eliminating the electoral college fix the problem?
First of all,
That's
because
what I wanted to hear.
Ellie and then Angela.
First of all, because people should vote, not land should vote. Right? Right off the top, we should be given power to the people. Secondly, we know from evidence, because America isn't the only country that exists. And when we look at Europe, when we look at the example of parliamentary systems, what we see is that the candidates there who are running in a parliamentary system do not just stay in the big cities. They don't just campaign in Cape Town and Johannesburg. They don't just campaign in London and Liverpool. They campaign all around the country, because in a parliamentary system, you have to run up the score as opposed to playing this 51-49% game, right? So, and then the third point, where did Donald Trump in 2020 get the most votes? California. Where did Joe Biden in 2020 get the second most raw votes? Texas. Right? So what you have is that you have Democrats abandoning Texas and Republicans abandoning California because of the Electoral College, thus disenfranchising many of the voters in California and Texas and New York and all these other states. If you don't have the Electoral College, you then have a reason to go into states where you might not, as Roland was saying, where you might not win, but where you can either run up the score or you can keep it close. Right?
So why have Democrats keep losing Texas, where I'm born and raised? It's because they campaign in Bexar County, San Antonio, Harris County, Houston, Dallas County, Dallas, Travis County, Austin, and then they completely ignore East Texas, West Texas, hope Latinos turn out in South Texas, and they be getting their asses kicked because, to Ellie's point, they run up the score in all those. There are 254 counties in Texas. You focus on 4, they focus on 250. That's why you lose. Angela, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the other big problem with the Electoral College and the way that it does direct funds and attention and candidate recruitment is that then we are leaving we're leaving folks behind, right? If you're in Florida right now, we're not coming to help.
Yep.
So you just are going to get more Ron DeSantis, more bad laws, right? More driving the extremist agenda in the nation and watching it spread. It's not okay for us to leave people behind because their state's not going to vote our way presidentially, right? We're about people.
And just to really quickly answer this nicely, this question, the reason why we need the Supreme Court is because they have a veto power over everything else that passes in electoral government. So there is not a single law or executive order that you can pass that the Supreme Court cannot veto. So if you don't control the Supreme Court, you control nothing.
So, and remember, that's federal Supreme Court, you the state Supreme Courts. We see in North Carolina where Democrats had Sheriff Beasley got 402 votes. Democrats had a 6-1 majority of that court. It went 4-3, 2022. They flipped, now Republican 4-3. And what did that court do? They reversed 3 decisions that were decided 2 months earlier. So like your earlier point, it's all political, and that's why we can't ignore those state Supreme Court races. Question.
Very quickly, my name is Samantha Williams. I'm from Daphne, Alabama. My question is, so are y'all saying that all of the things that are coming out, Clarence Thomas, all these efforts to reveal the depth of his corruption, nothing's going to get removed from that?
Clarence Thomas.
The question is, yes, nothing will happen.
Because explain why.
Impeachment for a Supreme Court justice is just like impeachment for a president. They got to get the Congress to vote to impeach, which under Republican control will never happen. And then you got to get 66 senators to vote for conviction, which under even a minority Senate is never going to happen.
I don't even want to impeach. I just want some rules and some ethics. And there's one person who can do that, and he just doesn't have the testicular fortitude to do it.
And who is that?
John Roberts. It's his court. I mean, Elliot, tell me if I'm wrong, but John Roberts can't establish some ethical rules and obligations for the members of his court if he so chooses, right?
He could. He couldn't. The question is whether or not he could punish them if they don't follow the rules. And the reason why Roberts becomes important is because Roberts has a lot of soft ways to punish a judge that we couldn't legislate. One great example, just to draw to the point, if John Roberts had ethical rules and Clarence Thomas violated those ethical rules, then John Roberts would say, guess what, Clarence, you can't write the affirmative action decision. Sorry, we're giving that to somebody else who follows the rules. And that's the kind of punishment that a person like Clarence and Jenny would really respond to.
And one of the reasons he can't go that hard is because right now, because it's 6-3 hard right, he goes with 3 progressive judges, he loses on the 5-4 end. So he has to also factor that in as well, because again, Trump got to.
Statistically speaking, the median justice on the Supreme Court, and by the median justice I mean the justice that is in the majority, the highest percentage of the time, is Brett Kavanaugh.
Question over here, what we got? Any questions on this side of the room? Brother over there? I'll take this last question, bro. Man, I don't take raps. Give me my phone. We taking the final question.
Just yell it out.
Brother, ask your question.
Yeah, I don't need the microphone. I'm not enough. My name is Jacob Rager. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. My question is, what can we do to educate people on the Federalist Society and how it's been impacting us from a judiciary standpoint?
Rashad first. Shouldn't have raised your hand. Rashad first.
Well, I think when it comes to taking on right-wing infrastructure, it's not enough to try to go after their infrastructure. We have to go after their funders, those who sit in polite society, who want to have it both ways, who want to be on corporate boards, who want to be on university boards, who want to sort of sit in polite society, but then every single day are doing sets of things that are advancing public policies that stand in the way of the other things. And so it's about exposing what people do at night when they want to operate a different way during the day. So taking on
Rashad, I want you to give them the example how y'all expose Alec, real quick.
So how we exposed Alec was we went after the corporations. 98% of Alec's money came from corporations who every single day came to Black folks and buy our products, use our services. And so Alec, who was both behind stand your ground laws and the discriminatory voter ID laws, we went after the corporations. So we didn't go after Alec. We didn't try to spend a lot of time protesting Alec. Alec can do whatever they want to do. What we did is we went to corporations and they said, now you have a choice. And we spent a lot of time behind the scenes, and then we started exposing those corporations publicly. And until we actually go to cut off the money from these institutions, we are in a different phase, right? And if we want to talk about the power of the black dollar, if we want to talk about the power of our economic resources, it's how do we actually leverage that to hold institutions accountable who say one thing to us about how they want us engaged and then go do another thing. Republicans would not have the type of power they have right now if they weren't getting it from the very corporations who show up on our radio stations and say Happy Black History Month. We actually have to do the work to hold those institutions accountable, because it's not about how you celebrate us when you put your finger on the scale of putting us in harm's way.
So the reason I said Rashad first is we had a conversation last night, so I knew what he was going to say.
Real quick, Rashad is absolutely correct. One of the things that many people found a little bit distasteful about Bernie Sanders when he was running for president of the United States, he kept advocating for taking the money out of politics, and you hear about that all the time. And you know what was amazing about it was, I agree, but what I don't agree with is unilateral disarmament. So while we are fighting that battle, I'm going to do the same stuff that they're doing. And so you ask about these organizations in a Federalist Society. I'm going to create a Federalist Society. You know what R&D is? No. It's called rob and duplicate. In politics, people call R&D. We don't call it research and development. We call it rob and duplicate. So I'm going to take their ideas and I'm going to duplicate it on my side. And so while we are cutting off their funders and raising hell, and we're putting them so they cannot have a comfortable time in polite society, I'm also going to create my own engine that looks just like the Federalist Society that promotes and puts people who look like us out there on the bench.
Ellie, final comment.
These are long-term solutions. The short-term solution, how about a rule that if you're a part of the Federalist Society, you cannot get a job in a Democratic administration at the federal or state level? That's a simple rule that we could do right now that we don't do. I can't get Joe Biden to do it. I can't get my governor, Kathy Hochul in New York to do it. Just don't appoint people who are part of the Federalist Society. Boom, we're solving half the problem because we're taking away the career advancement bubble that is the Federalist Society. So that would be a start.
And when you take that away, those judges have clerks. Those clerks become judges. They control the institutions. Then Leo, we put down the line how they use the power of those positions. Angela, your final comment.
Making these kids uncomfortable.
Yep.
You all remember when Brett Kavanaugh couldn't get his steak and he was real upset about that, right? There's no place for people who do harm like this in a humane society. Call them out, make them uncomfortable. Start a whole group that's their whole thing. I would love it. Live action trolling, anything. But there's no place for people like this among us.
Right.
Final comment here. In my studio, I have a portrait of Ida B. Wells Barnett, and her favorite quote is, "The way to right wrong is to turn the light of truth upon them." But the key is light. So when we talk about calling Senator Dick Durbin's office,
Well, you want Dick Durbin's ass.
I'm on the ass of anybody who has power, because black folks got them the power, who ain't using the power on behalf of black people. Which is why I had no problem calling out President Barack Obama when he wasn't doing what's right, because I was not just happy of having the first black first family. We know he only had 8 years, and so when we used to be voting for you, I expect something in return for that damn vote. So it's called, and I will. And I didn't give a damn about getting invited to any of the birthday parties, because I was there to advocate for black people, and I told him, man, no, I didn't. I guarantee you I didn't. Sure, I guarantee you I wasn't there. So, but here's my whole point. The whole point is very simple. I got my grandparents, maternal grandparents had 8 kids, 39 grandkids, 72 great, 122 great. I didn't need friends growing up, and I don't need them in DC. But what I am going to do is fight for black people. And what we have to do is put maximum pressure on anybody who is not using their position for the advancement of black folks. Because those of you in this room, you're not fighting just for you, you're fighting for your nieces and nephews and cousins and sisters. And so that's what we must be doing. And even if they are our friends should know we're going to jack them up. Because when Jesse Jackson Jr. was in Congress, he was coming on my radio show, his staff said, "Oh, you're going to roll the radio show tomorrow." He said, "Y'all can talk about whatever." He said, "No. He said, me and Roland are friends, but he will kick my ass publicly and live. So y'all better give me some points to be discussing." If we take that position, I think there's a whole bunch of politicians will get a sense of act right, because they know we will hold them accountable. Y'all, thanks for coming out, Congressman Johnson.